What can he do? Does he 2 to pass, 1 to pass, just take the Vanguard? Vanguard Insider, you can see he's going through every single possible outcome, going through every single timeline, finding the best outcome.
Don't tell me he doesn't have tricks. There he is.
It's coming down into the arena there.
And there's another trick star. What are we going to see?
Oh, the Valiente!
Valiente.
Tough decision, Eric's kind of... Oh my god, the Eric overdress. Holy crap.
We did see Mr. Tomley dry check that Valiente last turn.
What? All 4 Persona Rise!
What? Check his deck! Check it!
Man, this man is using all of his Time Leaper fucking magic.
The alternative was to not compete at all, because when you believe...
When he pulls the critical!
Oh, what a chad, dude. Getting straight to 3.
Oh, what did he just see?
The trigger!
He looked at it like...
Giving him the future he truly desires. This is
Idol generation.
This is Generation Stride, man. This is what this is. It's giving him the ultimate future. The man can cross space and time, leading into this very moment.
That's 43 into a 31, so that'll be a 2 pass. And there's another Arcus into his hand. And the heal trigger. Oh! Going to, what's the word, drive the rest of this game.
You mean like that crit trigger?
Or a crit. Or a crit trigger.
Did he no guard? Oh, he no guarded. Oh!
He did no guard.
Front trigger?
There's a front.
If there was any moment to rip the over trigger, it's now. And a heal trigger! Oh!
It's a heal! Oh my god!
6 damage
Charlie!
heal with a front trigger. Vanguard is at 33 right now.
Oh, check his deck! Check his deck!
He still has no counter blast. This man has been going with 3 damage, no face-up CD for 3 turns straight, and 3 Persona right turns at that. Now this is the big question. Does Vanguard Insider have the patented play? The patented turn 2 arcs play? Oh, and there it is.
The Arcus is attached into it. It's definitely an option. I think I would only...
Is he gonna get it?
Is it the Arcs? Is it the Arcs?
It's the Arcs! Part 2 play, let's go! Charlie's decision here will depend whether he rips an over trigger or not. I mean, there's all a mental... And he is taking that damage. It is the... I always forget the names of the great one. And a
heal trigger!
Thank god. Charlie's on 1 damage, he can probably take it.
And he's fine, but
it's a critical trigger. That is a 1 to pass. It's a draw trigger. He misses the Persona right. He goes straight in. He goes for the counter blast. He goes for the 23k Vanguard. And Charlie's dropping the 50k. Oh, trigger! Critical trigger! Second check! Nothing! It's a PG! Oh, god.
Mess up on the guard step or not hit defensive. Not hit that second 6 damage heal again. And there we go. That is 28, 38, 43. That is this 1-2 pass. He has a perfect guard in his hand. And he is 1 to passing the Vanguard. And he hits the heal.
He's no gods it. Eric, first check, nothing. Second check.
Heal trigger.
Oh, this man has no chill. Is Charlie going to be able to rip that heal at the end? Is Charlie going to be able to do it? He does it. He does the play. Oh, goddamn, boys. He's going to flip it.
Making sure he doesn't see it. He's going to flip it. He doesn't want to see it. He really saw it a little bit.
He starts to... Oh, what is it? What is it, boys? Oh, it's yellow. It's yellow. It's a front. And Eric takes the tournament, boys.
The winner of Cardfight Con Invitational.
Absolute Chad plays by Arena, taking the whole goddamn tournament. Dragon Empire reigns supreme. Storkea garbage. Let's go, Dragon Empire Chads. Rise up, gamers. Let's go.
Our winner, the one who took it all, called it out weeks before.
He was the first announced. The man was the first announced. He was like, yeah, I won it.
So yeah, I did a thing. I became the champion of the very first Cardfight Con Invitational. And in fact, I even became the undefeated champion as I didn't sacrifice or lose any round during the tournament, which is kind of mad. And honestly, I have no clue how I did this. Like, past me for some reason knew this, but current me couldn't know if I could trust myself from the past. Well, luckily it all worked out. Now, before we dive into this video, I want to congratulate not only the organizers from Cardfight Con for organizing this event, but also Vision for hosting the tournament itself. It's been an amazing experience. The event was really awesome. For some small hiccups here and there, but besides that, it's been a great day. Met a lot of awesome people. A lot of people saw awesome fights on the streams and during the entire tournament. So props to you guys for making this possible. And of course, thank you for inviting me to be a participant in this particular event. Now, for anybody that isn't aware of what Cardfight Con Invitational is, it's basically a spin-off event from the original Cardfight Con that happened last year. And in this case, it was an invitational tournament with some big names. Like, I'm talking about Different Fight, Strictly Broken TCG, WCC, Vision itself, and even the world champion from 2017, Jesus Herrera. There are a lot of big names that were in this particular tournament that made for some exciting competition. Like, there are even more names that I haven't mentioned, like True Champion Steven, Out of Orange Tyler, better known as TIE Fighter, and of course my opponents during this tournament, Winning Image, Living Proof, and of course the infamous Charlie, also better known as, what was it? Dino Laser something from Vision. It's a big name. Probably Cardweep is more accessible for most people. And that's just to name a few. There are even more on this tournament. So it was a pretty exciting roster of competitive players from all across the spectrum of the Cardfight Vanguard community. Now, the tournament itself, I love the entire experience. Like, I am really fan of the tournament bracket system they use to host the tournament, as well as deciding how matches are going to be played out. Because they use the system that uses a winner's bracket and a loser's bracket. So effectively, it's just a normal bracket system, like a top 16, but if you lose, you're kicked to the loser's bracket, which is basically a separate bracket, and you can keep competing in that bracket all the way down to the final loser's finals. And if you manage to be the only one left in the loser's bracket, you get a shot in the grand finals against the winner of the entire winner's bracket. Now, there are some upsides and downsides to this system, as it basically means that if you lose 2 times in the early 2 rounds, you're out, because once you lose in loser brackets, it is done. But what's awesome about this particular system is that if you go throughout the entire tournament without losing, you actually get rewarded, because in the grand finals, when the winner of the winner's finals matches up against the winner of the loser's finals, the winner of the winner's finals may lose an entire match, because the winner of the loser's finals need to win twice in the grand final to make things equal. Because the whole system of this tournament structure is that every single player can at least lose once during the tournament and not be kicked out of whatever position it is. And it also allows for some really awesome comeback stories to happen, because maybe 2 fighters fought against each other in the first round, and one of those fighters goes undefeated throughout the entire tournament, and the other fighter is kicked to the loser's bracket, but defeats every single opponent in the loser's brackets and returns to that fighter in the grand finals for revenge. Like, these types of storytelling are possible with a bracket system like this. And also, a nice thing about this particular system is that if you manage to get in top 8, you actually don't immediately lose once you lose 1 round. Like in normal Swiss and top cut that we see in Vanguard, if you went undefeated in Swiss rounds and then you up against in top 8 against somebody that went X2 and you luck out and you lose, you're out. That's the entire tournament for you, and you don't really get rewarded for going undefeated in the Swiss round. In this case, it doesn't matter if you're top 8 or top 4. If you were undefeated and you lose a round, don't worry, you're still in the tournament. You have another shot, because you can at least lose once before you're out of the entire tournament, which to me is a bit more fair and allows for more competitive players and top level players to shine much better through the whole system, as you can at least drop a game without being punished for it if it happens later down the line in the tournament system. That's it about the tournament system itself and the overall atmosphere of the tournament, because it's been a blast talking with everybody and chilling out throughout all the matches with other content creators. Made some awesome new friends as well. Let's discuss actual matches. I played a couple of games and they were something, alright. So in the first round, I was paired off against Atlas from Nexus at Night. And I'm somewhat familiar with the guy because I'm following their podcasts for a while. And I know he's a fan of Great Nature. So once we were paired off against each other, I was convinced he was going to play Magnolia. Yet, once he flipped his stutter, I saw Bruce. So I was completely taken aback, and I was kind of scared from her for a moment because I was personally playing Nirvana. You've probably seen it from the thumbnail. I was playing Nirvana in this particular tournament. And also, I completely forgot, here's the tournament split of all the clans. Yeah, for some reason, a lot of players were taking Zorga, and not a lot of players were taking Bastions, which I'm fine with, because I didn't want to play against Bastion. And Zorga, yeah, that's an equal fight, in my opinion, against Nirvana, so I was completely fine with it. But a pretty surprising split of clan usage. Now, back to the fight. Luckily, I went first, which means I have the initiative, but Atlas made a very good move being up against Nirvana play that's going first, as on turn 1 he calls an extra unit in the front row to be aggressive, but at the same time he protects his Vanguard right line, because if I can go into a Nirvana on turn 2, I can snipe his back row unit, his grade 0, and negate the entire advantage he would generate from his right line. And it was a good play, because I had the Nirvana in hand, so I couldn't really do that. So on turn 2, I had to rush him a little bit, call an extra grade 1 to the field, try to retire his front row grade 1 to negate his counterplay against me, but he guarded for it, so I can only snipe one of his 2 riggers, and he could go throughout his entire engine. Now, the interesting thing is, however, that particular turn, that grade 2 turn for me, turned the entire game, because he rushed me, he put me to 2, but once I ridden into my grade 2 and I start to rush him back, I checked the heal. Now, and heal is not enough, but the following turn on his turn when he attacked me, I checked another heal that went off. And then the following turn, on my turn, I checked another heal that went off. I healed 3 times in a row, which basically shut off his entire early aggression. And to make things worse, I managed to hit 2 perfect guards into the damage zone on his side, which meant his defensive capabilities were completely crippled. And into the mid to late game, when he went into those final rush turns, I could just easily take attacks and guard other attacks, and just basically pushed him down onto the pressure where he was on 4 damage. I attacked with the Vanguard, he no-guarded, sack the crit, and that's it. Basically, the ideal situation for a Nirvana player where you want to force your opponent to say no guard against your Vanguard. You run an X amount of crits, and those will probably then hit on that particular magic moment. So that basically was round 1. Now, for round 2, I was faced up against yet another Dark Stage player, yet another Bruce player, because I was faced off against the one and only Living Proof. So if I already didn't like playing against Bruce, this was probably the worst outcome for me, that I had to play at arguably one of the best Bruce players out there. But interesting enough, where Atlas did the early rush and played around my Nirvana snipe potential in the early game, Living Proof didn't do that. And I still went first. Now, luckily for him, I didn't have the Verena in hand, so I couldn't punish him for making that play. So basically, our first couple of turns were pretty vanilla, and he did a damage deny strategy where I went sometimes after my rearguards to not give me too much counterblast, but it wasn't too crippling to a degree that I couldn't use my skill. Usually I would have at least one counterblast ready to use potentially my Nirvana skill or maybe an Arcs. And early games, he had Edens in his hand, and I started to put some pressure on his Edens, either attacked into it, forcing him to guard for it, or retired, or later stage I used Verena's ability to just snipe it directly to get that on hit pressure off the board, because it hurts me way more than a Marjorie, as I don't want to him easily get free pops of my overdressed cards. But this game went on, and I mean on, to the fact that it came down to the last card in this deck. On my second to last turn where I would actually attack, I had 1 PG and a heal trigger or a crit trigger in my hand, and I was contemplating to just call them down, because I was at 5, I believe at 4 or 5 damage, and he had an entire board relatively filled with units, and he could potentially just final rush me. However, before I called down the PG, I did call down the trigger, but before I called down the PG, I checked his soul count, and his soul was on 1, and his deck was around 6-ish cards, so I knew there's no way that he can generate enough soul and then use the ability to restand. So I realized he can only attack me 3 times. So I kept the PG back in my hand, just for instance that maybe I drive check another PG and both of them can guard and attack, and if I hit a trigger or something, I can potentially guard every single attack with 1 card each. Well, it is as if the gods came down to my drive check, because exactly that happened. I drove check a PG and a crit, which was the perfect cards to have. So he went into his turn, he couldn't multi-attack, and he had 5 cards left in deck. 3 of those cards were triggers. And one of those triggers were an over trigger. Yet it came down to the wire, and I had to do a 1 to pass on the Vanguard, or at least I could only guard for one trigger to hit. So I believe perfect guard the Vanguard. He hits only in heal, putting him from 5 back to 4, and the second check was blank. That was extremely lucky. Then I went into another turn and I attacked him again, and it literally came down to the fact that if he hits the over trigger for damage, he would deck out because he needed to take a damage. And if there was the over trigger, he needed to draw the second to last card, and then he would draw the last card for his deck for turn. He took the damage. It was the crit. So he has 2 cards left in deck, and one of them was the over trigger. I don't know how this happened, but apparently the next card he drew for turn was the over trigger. So he had 1 card left in deck that was a non-trigger, and he started attack with both his triggers, and I was able to guard them both. And basically he went for deck out. It came down to his last cards. Now granted, in the second to last turn when I guarded his penultimate attacks, I was able to survive by intercepting a unit against the grade 2 from the Festival Collection. Now the thing is, you cannot intercept on his attack, but we both overlooked that. So in the grand scheme of things, I wasn't actually warranted to win in that fight, but because we both completely overlooked it and it came after the fact, we realized this after the game was already done. It is something we both learned, and we knew, okay, next time this doesn't happen because it's too late to now rectify this because we both went a couple of turns beyond that. So again, it was an amazing fight, and it was one of the hardest matches I had to fight, and it came literally down to the last card in his deck. Now for round 3, I went up against Winning Image, Sean, aka the organizer of the whole event. And he was playing Magnolia, so now I was actually playing against Magnolia, which I was expecting on round 1. Now, this match is a bit fuzzy because it was pretty fast tempo. Like, he started rushing me, which I was expecting because it's Magnolia, and he started hitting good cards. Like, on his first right line card from the grade 1, he hit the 15k grade 2 from the starter deck that gets an extra passive 5k power. That's a really solid hit to start pressuring me onwards, and he kept going and going and going. Now, triggers were stacked left, right, and center, but I have one lucky instant in the early game because on my second turn, and I also went first here, I sacked the over trigger. So my Vanguard restood, and I could attack again. Now, you might think an over trigger restander on turn 2 when you have 1 drive check isn't that great. It also had no rear guards, I believe. It's kind of underwhelming, but it gave me 1 extra card and it shoot him 1 extra damage. That's actually pretty big because that 1 card can potentially chump guard one of his attacks, and that extra damage means that he's 1 damage closer to the fact that he needs to start guarding all my big numbers, and Magnolia doesn't have a lot of resources to do so, which is pretty bad for them. Now, it came down to a situation, I believe this happened, I could be wrong, but sadly it wasn't streamed. He was at 4 damage, and I attacked him with an Valiente for massive numbers. He could not guard, he took it, he went to 5, and then I restood it, and he attacked again, and he had to take it again. He got a 6 damage heal. And at that point, I was freaking out because I put a lot of resource into that Valiente to make that count. Luckily, I could barely survive his next turn, and then I attacked with the Vanguard. He no-guarded, and I hit the crit, and it basically was done deal because he couldn't miracle heal twice out of that one. So it was basically down. I won my first 3 rounds. That was day 1, and day 1 was a best out of 1. So for day 2, I was in the winner's final, and it's now best out of 3. I was up against probably the antagonist of the entire tournament because I was up against Card Dreep from Vision, Charlie, and he was responsible for 50% of the over-trigger sack of the entire tournament. My guy has been over-trigger sacking every single opponent he has been facing. And I knew my time is up. He's gonna over-trigger sack me to oblivion, and this is going to be it. The entire tournament I've been evading over-triggers against myself. I was able to over-trigger in round 3 against Sean, but this is probably the end of my run. Well, followed up were 3 very, very tough matches. I lost a die roll. So this is the first time in the tournament where I went second. And he deployed the most obnoxious damage denying strategy I've ever faced in my life. Now granted, I haven't had a lot of practice against damage denying, so I had to figure a lot of out right on the spot here. And he wasn't giving me any single counter he couldn't take during his defensive turn. So I was very low on resource and he kept attacking into my rearguard. So I deployed a special tactic which I designed my deck specifically for, and that was to scrap Nirvana's counterblast skill and go for the infinite Persona Right skills. Just Persona Right, Persona Right, Persona Right to apply the pressure every single turn without relying on counterblast. And it saved me eventually the first round. I was able to write all 4 Nirvanas for closing the game. It was ridiculous and eventually managed to squeeze by in the first round. Now, the second round, I again went second, but this time I wasn't so lucky, and it basically came down that I was 5k short to guard, or maybe 10k short. Now, granted, I forgot to use the right line skill to Solbus 1 to get a Verena to hand, but I calculated it did not really matter, and in fact, it actually gave me more advantage position because I kept triggering triggers after those drive checks, and if I used the skill, I would have shuffled my deck and the entire outcome of the game would have been completely different. Because keep in mind, all these games against Charlie weren't a free 4-turn game. We went like 8, 9, 10 turns every single game of the best out of 3, and we played 3 games because now it was 1-1. He won this one. So now I was able to go first, and yeah, this basically was a repeat of what we saw before. It was a grind fest. We started doing every single play, and eventually we once again came down to a position where we had to want to pass, or we could only guard well, our opponent cannot run or hit 2 triggers, and exactly that particular scenario happened. And this was the case for every single game. Now, of course, I'm skipping a lot of content here, so I recommend you guys to check out the link in the description down below and in the pinned comment, where I'll link the official live stream of the tournament itself, because the entire second day was recorded and commentated. These matches against Charlie, they were something else, let me tell you. Holy shit. But because I went 2-1, I managed to be the sole winner of the winner's bracket. So I immediately progresses to the grand finals as the winner, which means I could lose a best out of 3 and still be able to become the winner if I win the second one. But apparently people were out for my blood. People wanted revenge. Because while Charlie and I were playing the winners finals, the losers finals were played between Living Proof and Winning Image Sean. So exactly the 2 players that I defeated in round 2 and round 3 were still in it in this tournament, which meant the top 4 comprised out of me and every single guy that I already defeated in the tournament. So somebody was out for revenge, and I was not excited for this one. So multiple things happened, and eventually Charlie managed to sack the living shit out of Sean in the losers finals and went for a rematch in the grand finals against me. And yeah, if the original finals were a grind fest and kind of ridiculous and hard attack inducing, these grand finals were another level above that. We started the first round. I went first this time, and he said to me before, you know what? I'm gonna try a different tactic. I thought maybe he's bluffing, he could do something else and try to force me to do some misplays. I had my opening hand and had 2 arcs there. If he would rush me, these 2 arcs are gonna be amazing. If he damage denied me, these arcs are dead cards in my hand. So I decided to discard one of the arcs from my right line on turn 1. I soon became to regret that decision, because he indeed was changing up tactics. He started rushing the living crap out of me, and I had no way to counter that or had an answer for that, because I did not have a second card that could abuse the counterblast. I had no way to benefit completely from all the counterblast that was given to me. If I did not discard that arcs, it was a complete different story and I could abuse the fact that he was rushing me. I basically lost the entire game there, even though I went first, even though his opening hand was really bad. He drew the overtrigger in his opening hand because he changed his tactic and I didn't prepare accordingly. He steamrolled me in the first match. Although steamrolled is a big word, it still went on a couple of turns, but it basically was already decided by the very first action that I did, and that was the discard of the arcs. Now, game 2, I knew, okay, he's changing up gears, so do I. So now I was preparing for a rush, but at the same time I was opening up the option that he could suddenly start damage denying me, as I don't want to then suddenly fall into his trap where I then suddenly turn the steering wheel all the way left and he is suddenly on my right. So I was going into a mix here, and that worked out. Like, I was able to capitalize on all the effects, I was able to do every single play correctly, and at the end managed to squeeze by with again a situation where he could barely guard my attacks and was able to push for game. Now, the final round of the tournament, that was something else, because remind you, I was up against a guy that was over-trigger sacking every single opponent in the game. Even in the losers finals, he was over-trigger sacking his opponent during the 2 matches he won. We're now 5 matches in, or this is the 6th match, and neither of us saw any over-triggers except from guarding with it. Now, he went first, and he started attacking, and I get a little bit damage. I then go to my grade 2 turn, I started a bit pushing back, but I couldn't really apply a lot of value, did just my typical arcs play, and that's about it. Now, the moment he went against my grade 2 turn, I believe he was then on grade 3, he started to pressure me a little bit, but then the biggest change up in the game happened, because on my grade 2 Vanguard, I managed to hit the over trigger for damage. So that shut down his entire turn. I stayed at 2 damage because I went from 1 to 2 as he critted me, as the second damage was a heal. He removed my arcs, and that was the entire turn. I could go into Nirvana and start applying pressure, 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 and we had a game on our hand. The entire advantage of him going first was negated by the overtrigger, and I had breathing room available here. And I started to abuse that breathing room to the utmost capacity. And then, probably the most iconic moment in the tournament happened. XYZ summoned the ultimate Virina Valiente. And this Virina Valiente did in work. Not only did it wasn't able to restand and apply more pressure and force a perfect guard out of his hand, the final turn, the extra power it possesses was the killing blow that he could not guard enough with the amount of shield he had in his hand, and it allowed me to go for a game. Now again, I am oversimplifying and skipping a lot of things here, because these final matches, basically the 2 best out of 3 matches that I had with Cardweep or Charlie, were insane matches that went on long. Like, I believe there were about 2 hours of fights that we had across those 6 fights. And honestly, I couldn't ask for a better opponent in the finals, because I had to take out all the stops to win those fights. I had to calculate every single turn, every single attack, every single card that I put down onto the field needed to be with 200% accuracy, because if I made one slight mistake, it would have cost me the entire match, and probably I wouldn't be sitting here talking about that I'm the champion of the Cardfight Con Invitational 2021. So again, to any of my opponents, and especially Charlie, I want to thank you for these awesome matches. I couldn't wish for any better opponents and awesome interactions, as you guys made this an awesome experience. But of course, you guys are also very curious of how my deck really works and what type of tactics I had. So let's take a look at my deck profile in detail and see how I built my deck and what type of specific ideas and theories that I had behind the decision that I made for the certain ratios. So as you probably would have guessed, I was playing Nirvana. I mean, probably my description of how my matches were probably that giveaway, but for the ones that didn't realize that, yes, I was playing the overdressed deck, which is arguably, for some people, very obvious. Like, yes, I'm a Gear Chronicle main, yes, Chronojet for life, but as seen as Dark States doesn't have an official Gear Chronicle ride line, I have to go with my red Chronojet. And so that basically brought me to this particular deck. Now, there are a couple of differences that you might see here from other lists, and certain choices that have a bit more thought behind them, even though they might look very generic. So first off, of course, of the right line, we've got Nirvana, we got Reiju, Reno, and I use Trickster as a starter. Now, we're gonna come back to that one later once we see the entire list. So we got the right line, which for the Trickster, besides, it's very generic. So then for the other ones, we of course got 3 copies of the Grade 3. As I explained in one of the fight videos, I was persona riding 3 times, so obviously I'm gonna run 4 of the Grade 3, and it's one of my backup tactics against damage denial. Then for the other support cards, we've got 4 Valiente for those clutch moments where you need to triple Valiente to strike the fear in your opponents, as was done against Card Reap in the final match of the final game of the final round. So I'm very happy that I was able to pull that one off. Then, of course, another very obvious staple is 4 arcs. The patented turn to play needs to be as consistent as possible, so that's why we run 4 copies of arcs. It's a great way to negate the minuses of overdressing. Giving 1 counterblast in the early game can make a major momentum shift if I'm able to use the arcs, because I get a +1 out of it, as the first Trickstar is for free thanks to the right line. Then I lose 1 card, draw 2 cards, which can be drawn into my Persona rides, my other Valientes, maybe another arcs, and other Verenas, maybe more Trickstars. It's just really good in the early game. Then, for the other one, grade 2 support, we run 3 copies of Verena. Now, originally I was planning to only play 2, just for the right line's sake, to even if it goes with damage overdraw into it, I am able to search it. However, I am very glad I did not drop him down to 2 copies, because so many matches during this tournament, especially in the final 2 games against Charlie in the winners finals and the grand finals, I drawn into all my Verenas, or at least except for 1 that was still in the deck that I could search out with the right line. Either I draw into the other 2, or 1 in my hand, 1 in the damage zone, or both in the damage zone. It happened way too many times during the tournament, so I'm glad I was still playing free. Now, for the final grade 2, I opt to run 3 copies of Burn by Prayers. It's basically 15k shield, that's what it is. I want to have as much shield value in as little as possible cards, because card value or card advantage is hard to come by except for arcs, so I need to make sure that every single card counts, and this allows me to get the most value of shield, besides other cards that I could potentially run. I could run maybe another attacker or more grade 1s, different grade 1s for more tech choices, but I put more value behind the extra 10k shield that this card provides. Yes, it might clog the hand in the early game, but in the early game I can just discard it for the right deck, and then in the late game, once I start drawing into them, then they're gonna matter, because then I will have that extra 15k shield that can definitely make a difference. And I used it a couple times during the tournament, so yeah, it's a pretty good card. Now for the grade 1s, obviously, 4 PGs. That second skill, originally I said that skill will probably hardly come up all too often. I used this skill in the tournament a bit too much, so yeah, I'm very happy with this potential 1 card perfect guard, as it saved my ass a lot of the times. But it basically came down to, apparently I have a new patented play thanks to Echo.
I'm still processing him moving
Second
his hands
check.
back and forth. I'm so confused.
Oh, it's a
And
PG.
another P. The patented second P guard try check.
This might be the attack to try to guard. You don't want him to gain pluses. You don't want him to guarantee that Nirvana in hand for a Persona.
And Charlie's dropping the 15k. Oh, trigger!
That's
Critical trigger! Second check! Nothing, it's a PG! First check, heal trigger.
You trigger.
No, it's a PG, but a PG is just as powerful, to be honest.
Because for some reason, I kept second my perfect guards in my drive check. It was always either nothing or a trigger, and in the second drive check a PG. It happened a lot during the tournament, so yeah, I'm happy that was a thing. Now, for the other grade 1s, I run 3 copies of Tensha Stat. This was a very instrumental card against the matches that are damage denying me, or where I needed more value. I'm gonna explain the raw value behind this card in a minute here once we see the entire list, but this card is probably one of the most MVP in the entire deck, even besides Arc or Valiente. This thing has done in work, and it allowed me to at least get the first win in the very first match against in the best out of 3 against Carby. But it did cost me the second game. But more on that later. Then, to wrap up the grade 1 lineup, I run 3 copies of LG Hazard. This is just a 10k booster. This hardly came up. It came maybe in 2 specific instances where I could boost the Valiente or boost the Vanguard. But because this is a thing, I usually want to use this as a Vanguard booster. So, yeah, I'm probably going to take this out whenever I have the chance, because I see not a lot of value in the extra 2k power nowadays. So, yeah, it's a card that's just there at the moment. Then, if we go to the grade 0s, we of course run 4 heals, 4 crits, or should I say 8 crits, 3 draws, best discard fodder, and the overtrigger. Yes, Echo, I did indeed run the overtrigger.
Did you stand atop the
Has
sun?
he ran the overtrigger? Like, have we seen it at all this tournament?
We must have done, right? I think we saw it at the bottom of a deck at one point, but I don't know.
I'm gonna open up his list right now. If he's not running the overtrigger, this man's getting my vote.
Man, if this man stands, that we stand this man. If we find out Eric isn't running overtriggers, like that's actual chat energy.
Now, and of course, lastly, we have 3 separate trick stars to round up the entire playset. Now, a couple of things here. One that might strike some people as odd because not a lot of players. There were quite a few that were not sold on Tencha stat. This might be an odd include for some people. And the Trickstar starter. Trickstar starter was a tag that some people deployed at the beginning of set 1 meta, but it's seen that Japan is been going back to Rising Egg as a starter. I'm personally more sold on the philosophy of running Trickstar as a starter, and the reason for that is that if you run the new overdressed starter, they can draw you a card in 50% of your matches. So 50% of the time you get a card. Whereas running Trickstar as a starter is 100% guaranteeing you a second Trickstar on turn 3. So you can overdress an entire front row. And if you go into Nirvana, you have the counterblast. Having access to 2 overdressed targets to the left and right of Nirvana, to me, is way more value than you could get from a blind draw from the original starter. And that starter is only a 50% draw. In Trickster case, you will always be able to generate that double overdress potential. But on top of that, in 50% of the instance, having Trickster as a Vanguard is pure upsides. If you go first, this card is insane because it gives you the upsides of the complete setup that you get, and you don't have the downside of not getting the draw because you wouldn't get the draw anyways. So, in my philosophy, if it's a choice between a 50% something or a 100% something, I will go always for the 100%, even though the 100% is maybe on average, maybe in equal value, less value than the draw, but spread across the board of all the chance that it will happen, it will probably be the same amount of value, or maybe even more Trickster. Because keep in mind, that blind draw that you get from the egg might be something you don't even want to draw. It might be an excessive amount of grade 1s that you don't really need. You need your overdress targets. It might be too many grade 3s that you start to draw, or it might be another trigger that you now lost that could have been in your drive checks. I am more in camp of having a Trickstar as a starter because it gives you that setup play more consistently and it allows you to be way more aggressive out of the gate. Now, the other thing, and the reason why this card in my opinion is MVP in this deck, is that this card allowed me to fight against the damage denied tactic. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't prepared for actual damage denying playstyles. I've played this deck a couple of times, but I haven't really played this deck on a competitive level. So I knew if I go up against somebody that is going to damage deny me, I'm going to be screwed. And I used to run, instead of this thing, I used to run extra copies of Reno, which allowed me to be more aggressive in the early game, which complements with Trickstar as a starter. But I knew if I would play this, I would open myself up to be heavily punished against damage denied tactics. So I decided to drop the Renos and go for Tencha stat. Because Tencha stat allows me to get an extra copy of my Vanguard, which is basically Persona Ride. The Persona Ride is 10k power to your front row indiscriminately from whatever unit it is. That's the same value of Nirvana, as Nirvana gives 10k power to your front row, which you usually have overdress cards, which is the same amount of power. This costs a counterblast to enable that. This costs a counterblast to enable that. It's the same amount of counterblast. But this has more value beyond that. This is anti-retire strategies because it removes self from the field, so it's hard for people to use Edens or whatever to retire it because it's already gone. But I also get a card from my deck. It's a deck filter at the same time, so I don't draw into more grade 3s or drive check into them accidentally later down the line. So it filters for better draws or better drive checks. And on top of that, it also, because it allows me to Persona Ride, it gives me 1 extra soul. That soul matters more than you think because it allows me to use Verena not once, but twice in most games. And that extra free snipe is huge, especially when games go on long enough where resource becomes scarce and suddenly out of nowhere being able to snipe another unit can be game ending. And it saved my ass multiple times. And it becomes even better with set 2, because with set 2 with the new Urger using Soul as the multi-tech, being able to generate more soul is even better because you can now multi-tech more consistently. And on top of that, because you multi-tech, going for Persona Ride instead of just a flat 10k of Nirvana is way better because the Persona Red also gives the extra power to the other units that are going to attack before Nirvana attacks, and that also aren't overdressed cards. So I am in the camp that Tensha Stat is an amazing card that's going to be probably still a defining card even in set 2 Nirvana, but at least that's my take on the build. And also one thing that I noticed throughout the tournament is that Arcs is an amazing card early game, but mid to late game it's actually kind of annoying and a dead card, because the moment you overdress into Arcs and it stays there on the board, if you can't go in a Valiente on top of it, it's just a 10k beater that doesn't really do anything, which feels really awkward, especially since this Farina can be a 30k or 40k beater, where this is always 10k weaker and doesn't really apply any more value. It's basically a waiting room for me to draw into a Valiente to overdress on top of it to get more value out of it. So honestly, I've become less favored about this card as soon as I learned about the weaknesses that this card actually possesses. So I might even experiment with set 2 to drop a couple of copies of Arcs in favor of keeping this Farina as well in the list, just because this is a better powerhouse. Because in some games I was able to have 2 of these Farinas on the front row next to my Nirvanas and being able to swing with 30k, 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 30k and sometimes 40k on top of it without wasting any more cards was detrimental to a lot of players at that time, and that doesn't come from an Arcs, which is the 10-10-10, or with the Nirvana 20-20-20, which is just 15k guard. This always asks 20k guard, which is really annoying, as it's always a trigger plus another extra card. This is just a trigger and that's it. So yeah, I've learned a lot about this deck, and I already see the options that I have with set 2 on the horizon. So definitely expect another deck profile, or should I say a deck spotlight for Nirvana and Urger for set 2 very, very soon on the channel. I hope within a week of this video that video will also be live. But that said, I'm gonna give it back past me to round up this video, as that is basically everything for the deck spotlight segment. Now, once again, I want to give a huge shout out to Cardfight Con, to Winning Image, as well as Vision for hosting everything. It's been a blast. It's an amazing tournament, and all the guys behind the scenes and anybody in the Discord calls that we had fun. It's been an amazing experience, and I want to thank you for this awesome event that you guys made possible. I'm very excited for the future prospect of what Cardfight Con is gonna bring. Maybe another Invitational. I definitely want to return once again as the undefeated champion, potentially being sacked out of round 1. Cannot wait for that to happen. I swear to God, if I call this again, I'm gonna be so pissed. But besides that, I hope you guys enjoyed this deck profile / tournament report. It's been an awesome experience. I promise, next time when this thing happens, I'm going to live stream it myself so you guys can follow every single thing, because there were certain incidents that sadly wasn't recorded that well, or you couldn't really see it from my perspective, which is kind of sad. Like the match against Sean is a bit blurry because nobody recorded it. Living Proof has his match against mine also recorded on his live stream. I will put a link to his Twitch channel so you can see the match between us as well, because it wasn't on the official tournament stream. And then the Cardfight Con's channel, Twitch channel, is also in the description and the pinned comment if you want to check the awesome matches that I had against Guard Reap and the scuffed recordings in round 1 against me, against Atlas from the Nexus at Night podcast. But that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters for making everything on the channel possible. You guys been amazing. But if you guys also want to be a supporter, then you can head over to patreon.com/insider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm done for today, and that means I've been Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.